Hello, and welcome to Pragmatic Product Chats, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris, your host for today's episode. Before we jump into today's episode, a couple of quick reminders for all of you, our valued listeners. First, if you enjoy our episodes and find the insights from our guest beneficial, please take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews help others find us, and they really make a difference, and they'd be much appreciated. Also, if today's conversation inspires you, don't hesitate to share this episode with your network. Spread the knowledge. Let's grow those community of product enthusiasts together. Also, we're thrilled to announce a newest workshop titled Advanced AI Techniques for Product Marketing, Leveraging Generative AI for Enhanced Product Marketing. This workshop is designed for professionals like you who want to take their prompt engineering skills to the next level. You'll learn to create complex and thoughtful prompts that drive specific and effective AI responses. Leverage AI to synthesize and interpret complex data sets, which is an amazing power that it has, and build nuanced, data-driven communication strategies that resonate with your key audience. It is a must-attend for anyone looking to enhance sort of the strategic decision-making process using the latest in AI technology. So check out the details on our website and secure your spot today. Speaking of product marketing, today's episode, we are diving deep in the product marketing side. We are going to talk to Sheila Rondeau, who is the CEO of MogXP, which is an experiential marketing house, done a variety of work with B2B and B2C brands, big ones that you know and love, Discover, P&G, Anheuser-Busch, you name it, she's worked with them. And we're going to dive deep into how do we drive engagement with our audience and why that's so important. How do we drive it? How do we measure it? And so it's going to be a really great show. Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat Series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for today's episode. Today, I'm extremely excited to have a new guest on. We have Sheila Rondeau, who is an enterprise marketer sort of extraordinaire. She is currently the CEO of MogXP, which she's going to tell us all about. And what she really focuses on is experiential marketing, right? How do we really engage with the audiences we have, which I think honestly is the goal of all marketing, whatever we call it, right? Is in order to do engagement, but it's really, really critical. And I think sometimes in the B2B side, we find it a little bit more difficult. So I'm extremely excited to have Sheila on today. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so the first thing I like to start with, Sheila, is everybody's origin story, right? Like, how did you get where you are today, and why are you so passionate about what you do?
My story is so different from most. I joined the Army at 18, and I spent 6 years on active duty, and then I spent 14 years in the National Guard. And while I was in the National Guard, I ended up working for Anheuser-Busch as an administrative manager. And they were having a problem with a huge program they were running, which was called Beer School. And so it was a mobile beer school that went to both retail and consumer-facing events. But in doing that, they weren't getting there on time. They weren't going with the proper products. They didn't have clear messaging. And logistically, operationally, it was a disaster. It was a $2.5 million program, and it was $3 million in the red.
Oof.
And it had been out less than a year. So they had huge issues, and I took over the program and rebuilt the program. And from there, we took a $2.5 million program and created a $21 million department. One of our clients we took on was vitamin water. So I helped build the vitamin water fleet of sampling vehicles that created such a disruption in the market that it caused Coca-Cola to buy them for $4.2 billion.
Nice.
So those are the types of things that started my career. I went to an agency in the Boston area where I got to work with some of the biggest, baddest, craziest brands in the world. I worked with Procter & Gamble and Kellogg's and I worked with Sony Electronics, and I worked with Discover Card and, GM and all these big companies. And well, a lot of them you recognize being consumer brands. There were also a lot of B2B brands. And, you start looking at the Assa Abloys of the world who, are great in technology, but their technology is security and doors and all of that. And how do you sell something to another business, but also understanding that businesses are also consumers and trying to figure out how to engage them. So lots of reiterations, but ended up starting my business 12 years ago. MogXP stands for Marketing Operations Group Experiential, because I focus on the marketing operations side, but very much experiential. So the marketing operations side is the math. I do the math that nobody else does, because in experiential, what you hear from so many of the agencies is, well, it's kind of loose and you really can't put numbers behind it. And you know what? I do modeling for all of that. And you should know what you're going to spend and what you're going to spend it on and what it should deliver before you spend a dime. And if not, you should relook at it, and it needs to be grounded in what your goals and objectives are. So if I don't do the model, how do I know if I'm going to meet your goals and objectives through the programming that I'm giving you? And if it doesn't, then we need to look at a different tactic. What's our different deliverable that allows us to do it? And so for me, I saw so many agencies tell clients that they should do something that didn't make sense for them and mathematically didn't work. And so when I had a chance to do it myself, I wanted to focus on, yes, I want the creative to be really sound and breathtaking and move you. But I also want to make sure that it drives purchase. And if it doesn't drive purchase, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Doesn't matter how clever it is or creative or beautiful it is. It doesn't matter. If it doesn't work, we're not doing our job. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that.
Yeah, I have everyone think of the analogy of the Super Bowl. People spend tens of millions of dollars between ad time and creating the commercial. And there are times that you have seen commercials that made you want to cry, that made you belly laugh. And the next day you're explaining it to one of your friends, but you can't remember the brand.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
It totally failed. That's a $10 million blunder.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. Okay. So I think there's so many things to dig in here. Let's start with a little ground setting. When we say experiential marketing, what does that mean to you? And why do you think that's such an important aspect of marketing?
To me, experiential is face-to-face marketing. So it can be face-to-face that pushes to digital, that pushes back to face-to-face, and all of those different things. It can push to retail. But when it comes down to it, it is allowing a consumer or a business to engage a product or a service. They can touch it, they can smell it, they can learn about it, but they are meeting people, quote, from your company or brand ambassadors who represent your company and your brand in order to help them understand how your product or service fits their lives. It can be sports and music sponsorship activation. So being on a concourse at a concert venue. It can be meet and greets that allow your buyers to be in a position where they may never be able to meet a celebrity or a musician that they have great heart for, or to be at a game they could never go to otherwise. It might be taking a trade show and literally turning it on its head. It might be VIP hospitality. It can be hotel drops. It can be guerrilla sampling. So it can be PR stunts. So there are so many different ways of doing it. I mean, we've done some great PR stunts, even in the middle of business meetings and expos, where we didn't buy a booth space, but we took over the space by doing something clever that brought all the attention to us.
Do you have any examples you can share?
Well, one of the things we like to do is to show up on site, and instead of having a booth, walking the halls of it and then bringing in a camera crew and doing an interview in the middle of it.
Oh, that's smart.
Okay. And you don't take a little camera, because right now you can record on your phone.
Right. You make a production of this. Yes.
You splash. Or in the middle of your booth, you do some type of fun engagement, having a fuel distribution company. They were doing a traditional booth. Well, forget the traditional booth. So if you've got guys who are buying fuel, like they're competitive, they're truck driving, fun, just they want to be competitive. We built a great confidence course with remote controlled trucks.
Oh, nice.
They were supposed to, have a competition where they're racing. Well, instead it ended up more like, roller, derby style, where they're crashing into each other. But in doing something like that, you engage them, and they want to talk and they want to have fun. And all of a sudden you're creating memories and jokes about who did what and crazy drivers, instead of, today's discussion is going to be, you can do those. You can do classroom settings, but you've got to have it engaging. You've got to have somebody that takes their breath away, that can speak to it in a way that makes them stop and listen. And you literally have 3 seconds. You have 3 seconds to change someone's buying habits by getting their attention.
So you said you started your agency 12 years ago, and a little thing happened maybe 4 years ago that probably drastically changed it, right? We had COVID, and COVID drastically changed sort of the in-person field. And I hear plenty of people that was, we didn't do in person, so all those budgets were cut, who've really struggled getting in-person budgets back, right? They sort of, the feeling is that those sort of live events, those going even to in-person salespeople is dead. No one finds them important anymore. That is definitely, pushback that we get when we're looking at those. And sometimes it's pushback that we give, that we think these live events aren't really a thing anymore. I know you have a very different perspective. Tell me a little bit about that.
So people do business with people they know, like, and trust. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've heard it a million times over the years. Sitting across the table from someone, having dinner with someone, walking around an expo center, having those type of experiences bond you with people. You can feel their energy. Well, this is great. Us being across the screen from each other can be meaningful, but there's a difference in energy. There is a difference in feeling something and taking the risk out of buying by sitting at the table with someone and having them show you how it works. It is different than being able to feel it, smell it, taste it, to be able to see the quality, feel the weight of something. And you don't get that when you are on a video. Mm. And while it cuts down budgets in some ways, like I refuse to pitch a large project if the client won't allow me to pitch in person, because at a certain point, you either value the experiential piece, or why am I pitching it virtually? You don't get it. Yeah.
That's interesting. I like the way you put that too, that taking the risk out of a purchase. Like the fact that if I already had a relationship with you before COVID happened, I already have it established. It's not as hard to maintain it virtually. But there is a piece of it where anytime we purchase for ourselves or for our organization, it is a risk. We are putting our reputation on the line within that organization for a purchase. And like these purchases aren't small, right? They're big. And so there is an aspect of risk mitigation, and we can do that through all kinds of other things. But it is a piece when you meet someone that is hard to replicate somewhere else. So that's a really interesting way of thinking about why it's so critical in the process, and also the sort of stages of the funnel where it plays a role, right, is interesting.
My example to people is think about how hard it has been to onboard new Gen Zs into your organization, knowing that during COVID, during their college years and their first couple of years in the business, they have been remote. They don't have the same etiquette. They don't understand the value of networking. They don't understand the water cooler learnings, the learning from people around you who have so much more experience. And we don't get the energy from them. Like we used to love to bring in new people into the organization and feel their energy, and it just kind of reinvigorates you. And think about how many companies are struggling with keeping young people engaged and how quickly they move from job to job. And that's because we're not engaging them. We are not acclimating them into the business, and we are not pouring into them the same way because they're not with us. Because we can't engage them just by the sheer energy and letting them hear all the conversations that are happening around them that feed into that energy and teach them. They miss all of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because I think the other reason that some of the live events, right? So there's COVID and we survived COVID and we didn't have these live events. They're not inexpensive. Like, let's be honest, right? But the other piece of it, the other reason people struggle getting it back in the budget is one of the things you talked about early, which is really measurement, right? The argument with trade shows has always been, if, the biggest thing is if I'm not there, what will people think of me, versus by being there, this is what I'm going to deliver. And then there's always we got a lot of names, but we didn't get a lot of leads. And obviously this measurement part and the operations part is a really, like, you build that in from the beginning. So let's talk about that, because I think a lot of people do really struggle with it. They want to be able to measure the impact, but they really struggle with it. So tell me what to do.
Okay, so first of all, you have to look at what you're spending, and if you're spending it in the right places. Are you engaging people? So when I'm doing experiential, I look at so many different measurements. There is a national average of how many miles you drive with your logo and highway versus city. So that awareness piece. There is the social media piece of telling people where you're going to be, whether they see you there or not. So you're using that social media piece to, one, invite people, warm up your connections, and also work on the algorithms in LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram to see content going back and forth between you and somebody else, which then allows them to see more of your content. So there is a multiplier there in just visibility. You think about sales, you think about the number of touches you need in order to be able to sell. And to be able to sell, they say between 8 to 12. Okay, that's part of it. So those count as touches, as long as you are engaging them and giving them quality information. And that you're doing in a way that is respectful. You're sending them emails to it. So that all counts. And typically, if it's an invite to something that they are planning on attending anyway, or at least is in their industry, the click rate is much higher. Then you go to the event itself. You have signage. You have the interaction. So again, I go back to, if you have a traditional trade show and you're doing what everybody else does, then you know what? It is difficult, because handing them a pamphlet is not the same as engaging with them. So do something that makes people want to spend time in your booth, if you're going to be in the booth. Otherwise, do a VIP dinner. Do a hotel room drop with an invitation to a special event, or an invitation to your booth for a roundtable discussion, or bring somebody into your booth to do a podcast like this, where people can be interviewed and they can create those sound bites that can be used as content for them and for their prospective buyers that elevate both brands.
That's a nice idea too.
All of those, it's the measurement of the people you touch, how long you touch and you speak with them, what type of engagement you have with them, if you are creating memories, if they are walking away with something of value. Each of those things we give value to. And then what is the follow-up? So we have all these different touch points, and based on all of these touch points, we give value to them, and they are a weighted value depending on the level of engagement and the value that it is perceived by the end user or buyer.
So you're really kind of laying out metrics for each piece of that and a plan, right? I mean, I think this is where your military background comes in too, right? There's a plan and it's organized. It is a big operations piece, right? I think sometimes people also forget that part of marketing. It is 100% an operations and events in particular. It is logistics. And it's not just the hard logistics. Can I get everything there? Can I get the people there? Can I get the items there? But it is thinking about the experience logistics and what are they going to see when they get there? How are they going to find us? What are we going to do? All of those pieces need to be thought through in order for it to be effective.
And then you do the math and decide if it's worth it. Then if it isn't necessarily a trade show, does it become a road show where you rent a hotel space or even a gallery space that you bring your buyers from a particular market into and have an experience for them? I know that for many years ago for Charmin, they were looking at, and while toilet paper may not be sexy, it is probably the product people think least of when you're buying it. You buy it because either that's what your family always bought and you just go to
There
it.
is like a family legacy with your toilet paper. You're like, we are a Charmin family, or, you know.
Or for some other reason, you pick it and it's always been your brand. You don't think about it. You just always buy the same one. People just do. But when Charmin went to the mega rolls, we built a kiosk that allowed them to take it to the retailers so they could see the math in the difference in the space. So shelf space is everything in retail. And if they could allow people to buy more in less shelf space and less warehousing and less trucking, they did the math for the retailers, and it was crazy how much it saved. And they're like, sold. But literally, we had a built-in calculator that was every time you put a roll in, the big roll, the mega roll versus a regular roll. And the calculator would just calculate away.
Nice. Well, I think that's so important too. And that's a great demonstration of knowing when you're thinking about engagement, the first thing you have to recognize is who you are trying to engage, right? So in this case, it wasn't the end user of the Charmin mega rolls. This is the retailer, right? So it's who's going to be, and then the persona, like you talked about earlier with the sort of gasoline and the truck driver. There is who I want to engage. Like, what is their role? What is their persona? Because that's going to help me understand how they want to engage. And what is it that I want them to learn or understand? And I think sometimes that also is an important part that can be skipped, because I can get people to engage in all kinds of things. But it's kind of like the Super Bowl ad you mentioned. They have to be engaged in something related to the brand, because it has to relate to what I want them to know. Right. In this case, I want them to know that they're going to be able to charge more because the rolls are bigger, but it's going to take less space in their shelves. Right. But you've really got to combine those things. Who am I trying to get? What do I want them to leave to understand? Because ideally that's built into the experiential aspects of it.
Right. And it's about finding the right tactic and having it as a part of an integrated program.
Yeah.
Any one of these by itself isn't enough. Marketing has to lead to sales or it doesn't work. I tell businesses, I work with anything from really small businesses to enterprise. And when I talk to them, it is what elevates your brand, what creates awareness, and what drives purchase. And if it doesn't do one of those three, don't do it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing with sales is, again, I've been in marketing a long time. I know plenty of arguments that have happened between marketing and sales, right? Where the leads come over and we're like, all these great leads, they were super talkative with us. And they're like, but they didn't. Again, part of that is, are they talking about the right things that are leading to, it's great if they wanted to talk to you about the weather. But unless I'm selling, WeatherBug, that is not helpful. I have not actually warmed it up from the sales team. But if we're talking along the lines of the competencies of the problems we solve, then when the sales gets it, that is a warm lead. Not that they know who we are and they talk, but that they're in the right conversation. And that's really what we want to deliver.
One of the most important things is the messaging. And it is not about why we're better, why we are prettier, we're whatever. What it comes down to is, what do we solve for and how do we fit your life? How do we make you the hero? Because if it's me, I have found the sooner I stop talking about me and start solving problems for my clients, that's when I close deals.
Yeah. Yes.
And that needs to happen in marketing, not just sales.
So when you think, so you talked a little bit about, well, you talked a lot about, this is not just an event and a one thing, that it's part of an overall program. And that program also includes, necessarily, they're not all in-person aspects, right? That there are these in-person leads to digital, and there's sort of, it's all kind of combined. So let's just think for a minute when we think about the digital aspects of a campaign and how we make those engaging, right? It's a little bit different than in person, but it's also important, right? What are some techniques you've used there? Where do you think are some really good sort of advice that you would give people on making digital experiences engaging?
Yeah. So first of all, it is about talking to your clients or customers at locations that are relevant to them. So figuring out, are they email people? Are they text people? Are they phone calls? Are they LinkedIn? And sometimes it's a little bit of all of those. But also it's about creating a relationship. And engagement is building a relationship, not just speaking at someone, speaking with them. And so if people need to think about social media, brands are the worst. Brands speak at people, not with them. The best things that ever equate to eyes on or clicks on in LinkedIn are polls, because you're asking people's opinions.
You're engaging them. Yeah.
Yes. But I also talk about, for people who are doing marketing in LinkedIn because they are doing business to business, stop the great big sales messages on LinkedIn. Give them value. You create content that adds value, elevates your brand, and shows that you want to improve their life and give them value and give them things instead of always take. Like, listen to me talk about how great I am, instead of, these are things you need to know. Here's a checklist. Here are pieces. We have an event. I'd love to introduce you to people. When you open your network to people, they're much more likely to talk to you. Do you know that I used to send out a message? I would send out 100 messages and get 40 meetings on LinkedIn. Think about the click rate you would need to get 40 meetings. And literally, I would send a 3-line message, because if it's more than 3 lines, it's too much. But I would send a message and literally say that we have this amazing tool to network, and so few of us really know who's in our network. Do you have 15 minutes to introduce ourselves to one another? No sales pitch.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. People will spend the 15 minutes. And by the way, let them speak first. Let them talk about themselves first, even if it takes up the whole 15 minutes, because they will think it was a better conversation. And they're more apt to give you an additional conversation.
So one of the things I think is really interesting about this space is when we think about trade shows, they've been around, I wouldn't say from the dawn of time, but maybe there were trade shows about, stone wheels in the early days, but they've been around a long time, right? Some of these other things are. And yet I think agencies like yours, it's a constant innovation too, right? So what you're saying is, yes, they've been around, but don't kind of break the mold a little bit. So how do you and your team kind of stay innovative and ahead of the curve in something that is sort of also rapidly changing?
First of all, I make sure that anytime I go to an event to look at technology, to look at engagement, I take one of my young team members with me. I bring people who are different from me, who look at it differently, and who want to be engaged differently. I always go with the consumer twist to my mind. When I am building out activations, I do what I call a day in the life of document, where I look at what happened the entire day of that consumer or that client in order to understand whether or not, one, we're relevant. What else are they seeing? What other things are drawing from them? And so when we do it, we challenge ourselves to look for new technology, to look at new ways of engaging. And at other times, we look at going old school that are nostalgic and fun, that we forgot about our childhood.
I think sometimes in B2B, we forget that our buyers are people, right? End of the day, there's a people aspect to it, and engaging with them on that level is a good thing. It is a huge part of a successful sale and a relationship build. And it's fun. Like, who doesn't want to have fun?
My first rule in hiring my staff for a trade show is I don't want trade show models. They stand there and point. Okay, guys, that's not what we're looking for. I would rather have a 10 in personality and a 6 or 7 in looks.
Right.
Then a traditional trade show model is a 10 in looks and usually a 5 or 6. And it's not always like that. Please know I'm being very...
No, and we don't mean like in their daily lives, are they? But that's not what they're there for. That's not what they've been trained for, right? Yes.
Exactly. They are trained to point and give you only the details you ask for, or the details around the car or whatever the software is. And instead, I have folks who never go down on the heel of their feet. They are literally on the balls of their feet the entire time. They are almost bouncing. They should have big smiles on their faces, and they should always say hello. And if you walk into a trade show booth and somebody's not asking you how you're doing, instead of immediately saying, oh, let me show you this, then no, that's not how it works. That doesn't work.
So you talked a lot about some really great campaigns that you've done. And one of the things we always like to share on the show, because we all have them, are sort of the stories of when we maybe learned from failure. Right? Or it didn't go as we planned it, but led us to some pretty good lessons, right? Like, that's how we learn. The only time we fail is if we didn't learn from it. So do you have any good stories in retrospect at the time they didn't feel good, of things that you learned along the way from something that didn't go quite the way you expected?
Absolutely. It doesn't mean the whole event was a total failure. It means, we built out concert venues in the middle of Walmart parking lots. Sorry, Chicago in the spring is not always a great time to do that.
Did you have some unfortunate weather?
Do a lot of that. And that's the difference between doing a trade show and doing, surprise and delights.
Yeah.
And you show up in a Walmart parking lot and you build it out, and you can't put the back wall on to your tent or to your stage. So you have no scrim back there. And so you can see ugly, but you know what? It was still a great show.
Yeah.
But also understanding that, you can't control everything. There are times where, the tech director who comes in, crosses the ground with the neutral and blows your system. And you have all of these things happen we've had state fairs where a hurricane has come through, and we've had others where we've got crew members diving into ditches because there's a tornado in Iowa. Guess what, guys? It's the nature of our beast. There are a lot of those things that happen.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's so important to have the right people there too.
One of the things that we learned, one program that was difficult was we had a program where we wanted to talk to senior citizens, and we're not talking just the AARP 55 plus. We're talking 65 and older to get them to transfer prescriptions. And in doing it, there are so many gatekeepers. And regardless of what we offered them, we couldn't get enough people at the events. We couldn't get the nursing homes and the families to bring people out to some of the events we wanted to bring them to. And so we ended up bringing ourselves, we got them to allow us to come in. But even then, attendance was small. But what we learned was spending a half an hour with a senior means we have them for the rest of their lives. They are so brand loyal. And we're like, literally, you spend a half an hour with them every 4 or 5 or 6 years. And they tell people for years about how we came into their facility and we spent time with them, and the people were so nice and they helped solve problems for them and fixed all these things. And in doing that, we learned so much about the senior community and how we could speak to them differently, that even though we didn't get the big numbers we wanted, we accomplished the client's goals by conversion rates.
Okay, your conversion rate's higher because your relationships are deeper. That makes sense.
And at the same time, we've also learned that 20-somethings don't want to spend a half an hour or an hour with you. They want to spend 5 minutes with you, but they want to spend that 5 minutes much more often and on their time. So they want to find you, or they want to be referred to you, and then they want to like you well enough they refer you to someone else. But they want to feel like they find you, which means don't force yourself upon them. Let them come to you and make it compelling. But then remember that you have to engage them on a regular basis without spamming them.
Yes. Yeah. That balance.
Yes.
Nice.
And so B2B, that's important, because when you realize who the brand is that you're selling to, or as a brand, you are selling to other companies. And when you look at what that demographic is and who those buyers are and who's making those decisions, a lot of those decisions are being made by people who are much younger, much different, and they look at it so much differently. One of my clients is a 20-something in the medical space.
Yeah. Very different. Okay. We talked about lots of different things today, Sheila. If you were going to have our listeners do 2 things differently tomorrow, based on what we talked about today, what would it be?
Look at any program that they have, any campaign they have, and if it is not fully integrated and does not have an aspect of engagement marketing or experiential, reconsider it. The other is stop talking to your customers and start speaking with them. Put a smile on your face and show them you are a person first.
That's a great advice, Sheila. All right. If I know you have lots of other advice, if people were looking to learn more about you and kind of your philosophies and your approaches, where should we send them?
My website, which is MogXP.com, or LinkedIn. I put out a ton of content on LinkedIn in articles and blogs and so on. So feel free to reach out if you have questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Sheila. It was a pleasure having you on today.
Thank you so much.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget that coming up next month, we are going to start the listeners' question segment. So we absolutely love hearing from you, our incredible community of product enthusiasts. And so if you have a question that you would like answered either by myself or I can grab an expert to help with that answer, please send it in and we'll address it in an upcoming episode. You can email us at productchats@pragmaticinstitute.com. Just include your name, your title, and of course the question. Or if you prefer, give us a call at 480-536-8635. That's 480-536-8635 and leave us a voicemail. Don't forget to mention your name and title along with your question, and we might just play your voicemail on the air. All right. So whether it's about product management, product marketing, or anything else related to the world of product, we want to hear from you. Don't be shy. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.